You're listening to the Valley Current.
Imagine you could take like less than $14 a day, so the cost of maybe a decent lunch or a couple of fancy coffees, and turn that into a staggering $142 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. And not over centuries, but by the time a newborn baby today reaches retirement age.
Which is, that sounds completely absurd.
It totally does. It sounds like the pitch for a late-night infomercial or some kind of financial scam.
It absolutely triggers that specific alarm bell in our minds, When we see numbers that large attached to daily contributions, that small human intuition just looks for the catch.
Right.
We're hardwired to assume that a $140 million payout requires, winning the lottery or inheriting a massive estate.
Or building the next huge tech monopoly.
Exactly. We simply do not intuitively grasp the geometry of deep time.
But the math we are looking at today tells a completely different story. And it is entirely rooted in public policy proposals. So today we are doing a deep dive into an April 2026 special report from the Entrepreneur Law Group, also known as ELG. Right, ELG. And the report is titled The Trump Account 65-Year QQQ Projection. Our mission today is to tear this model down to the studs. We're going to unpack the underlying arithmetic. We're going to confront the, frankly, very harsh reality of inflation over a 65-year timeline.
Which is huge.
That's massive. And finally, we're going to expose a hidden tax trap inside this financial projection that will absolutely blindside people if they aren't paying attention.
Yeah, and before we get into the mechanics of this model, I actually need to speak directly to you, the listener, for just a moment. As we go through this deep dive, you are going to hear some politically charged terminology.
Right, definitely.
The source material we're analyzing is specifically focused on proposed regulations under IRC Section 530A, which are colloquially and legally in the ELG report referred to as the Trump account. I want to make it unequivocally clear that we are not taking any political sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the politicians or the underlying policies within this content.
Not at all.
Our role today is strictly objective. We are here to act as your guides to break down the hypothetical math, the economic principles, and the financial concepts contained in this original source material. We're just looking at the numbers and the mechanics behind those numbers, period.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the baseline setup of this model is actually incredibly simple, which is kind of what makes the final numbers so shocking. Here is the foundation of the ELG projection. A child is born.
Right.
And at birth, they receive a one-time $1,000 federal pilot seed deposit under IRC Section 64384.
Just $1,000.
Just $1,000. From that point on, a total of $5,000 a year is contributed to the account. That's broken down as $2,500 from an employer and $2,500 from the parent. And that's it.
Yeah, that's the whole input.
Exactly. That $5,000 a year acts as an ordinary annuity. So it trickles in steadily over time, not as a lump sum. And it is invested entirely in a QQQ equivalent U.S. equity index.
So essentially tracking the NASDAQ Q100.
Yep. All dividends are reinvested. Nobody touches the money for 65 years. So the total out-of-pocket investment over that entire human lifetime, just $326,000.
That is the crucial baseline to keep in mind here. $326,000 of actual capital deployed very slowly over more than 6 decades. Now, the ELG report provides 3 different scenarios to project what happens to that capital.
And the outcomes are wild.
Yeah, they are entirely dependent on the return assumption. So scenario A is the conservative model. It assumes a 10% annualized return, which broadly mirrors the long-run historical average of the S&P 500. Under scenario A, at age 65, the account is worth $24.96 million.
Which is already a phenomenal number for a $300,000 total investment. I mean, $25 million bucks.
Right, but that's just the floor of their projection.
Crazy. Then we move to scenario B, which they call the historical mid. This uses a 13.5% annualized return, which tracks the actual historical average of the QQQ index since its inception in 1999, including dividend reinvestment.
Okay.
Under scenario B, that same account at age 65 is worth $142.83 million.
Wow.
And just to map the upper bounds, scenario C looks at a 14% historical high, which pushes the terminal value to $183.47 million. What's fascinating here is the extreme sensitivity of compound interest over long durations.
Because it's such a tiny difference in the percentage, right?
Exactly. We were looking at a mere 3.5 percentage point difference in annual return between scenario A and scenario B, 10% versus 13.5%. But that tiny variance creates a terminal wealth difference of nearly $118 million. Okay, wait. I have to push back on this right away. Because saving this way is like planting a magic penny that doubles. But if the soil is even slightly less fertile, say 10% instead of 13.5%, you still get a massive oak tree worth $25 million, just not the $142 million forest you were promised.
That's a great way to put it.
But the stock market does not just cut you a neat 13.5% check every January. We're looking at a straight line projection here. What happens when the market drops 20% in a year?
That is a highly critical observation.
Yeah.
And the ELG report includes a very explicit disclosure addressing exactly this.
Okay, good.
This is a hypothetical projection for educational purposes. It assumes a constant, uninterrupted annual return, which entirely masks sequence of returns risk. In the real world, a 50% market crash requires a 100% gain just to get back to break even.
Exactly. Reality is messy.
Right. The math in the report is perfectly accurate based on the inputs, but the real world never provides a perfectly smooth exponential curve.
I'm glad they disclosed that. But even with the hypothetical straight line assumption, the raw geometry of the projection is just wild. How does a 3.5% bump in yield create a 5.7-fold difference in the final outcome?
You have to look at compound interest not just as growth, but as a growing workforce.
Fine.
Every time a dividend is paid and reinvested, you are essentially hiring a new worker whose only job is to go out and earn more dividends. In the early years, your workforce is small.
Sure.
But a 13.5% yield allows you to hire new workers substantially faster than a 10% yield. Over 65 years, that tiny hiring advantage compounds so aggressively that your eventual workforce is millions of times larger.
Let's stick with that idea of the timeline, because when you hear $142 million, it is really easy to assume that the wealth just builds linearly.
Right, like you're adding a couple million every year.
Exactly, like, oh, just another 2 million this year. But to understand the true mechanics of this kind of wealth generation, we have to discover when the money actually materializes.
And this brings us to what financial planners call the knee of the exponential curve. Because of the rule of 72, we know that at a 13.5% return, this account doubles approximately every 5.3 years.
Okay.
Because of that doubling mechanism, the early decades look incredibly sluggish compared to the final result. Let's trace the actual milestones. At age 35, after 35 years of contributing $5,000 annually, meaning $176,000 of actual capital is in the market, the account holds about $3.16 million.
Okay, so $3 million at age 35 is life-changing, sure. Yeah. But it is nowhere near the $142 million headline number. You've gone through over half the timeline, and you have, what, roughly 2% of the final wealth?
That is the nature of the curve. It's just the setup phase. Now watch the acceleration. From age 35 to age 50, without any heroic extra capital being added by the family, the balance leaps from $3.16 million to $21.4 million. And then the final stretch. From age 50 to 65, it rockets from $21 million to $142.83 million. To put the velocity of that into perspective, in year 65 alone, the account is generating approximately $18.7 million of growth in a single year.
In 1 year.
In 1 year, completely on autopilot.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you spend the first 35 years pushing a snowball up a hill just to get to 3 million.
Right.
But the last 15 years, that snowball is rolling down a cliff, picking up $122 million in pure ice.
That is exactly what's happening.
So that 18th million generated in year 65 is more than 50 times the total amount the family contributed over their entire life. Which is the mathematical argument for starting this at birth, right? To eliminate every single delay in the compounding clock.
It is the absolute foundation of the strategy. The engine driving this projection is 65 years of uninterrupted compounding. If you truncate the timeline, you destroy the knee of the curve. The magic only happens in those final doubling periods, where the base is so massive that even a normal percentage return generates tens of millions of dollars in nominal value.
Nominal value. Okay, I'm really glad you emphasized that word.
Right.
Because we have to do a massive reality check right now. The nominal numbers are so staggering that it naturally invites skepticism.
Of course.
We have to address the giant elephant in the room. What in the world is $142 million actually going to buy you in the year 2091?
That is easily the most important caveat in this entire analysis. A dollar in 2091 will not buy what a dollar buys today. Inflation is the silent, uncontrollable force that constantly erodes purchasing power.
And the ELG report covers this, right?
Yes. They unpack the inflation deflator calculation quite thoroughly. They assume a 3% annual consumer price index, or CPI, inflation rate. Now, they note this is actually a somewhat conservative choice.
Conservative meaning higher inflation.
Exactly, meaning it assumes higher, more damaging inflation than the Federal Reserve's long-term target of 2%.
Okay, so they are baking in a slightly pessimistic inflation scenario to stress test the model. How does that math actually play out over 6 decades?
It acts exactly like compound interest, but in reverse. It's exponential decay. If prices rise 3% per year on average for 65 years, what costs $100 today will cost about $690 in the year 2091.
Oh, wow.
To put it another way, a single $2091 dollar is worth about 14.6 cents in 2026 purchasing power. Therefore, when we look at that massive, headline-grabbing $142.83 million nominal value, its actual real equivalent in today's money is roughly $20.91 million.
Okay, so it's like finding out you won a $142 million lottery, but when you go to the store, they pay you in quarters instead of $100 bills. It's heavier, it spends differently.
Right.
But hey, you are still walking away with the equivalent of $20.9 million.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it remains undeniably transformational wealth. Even after adjusting for a lifetime of 3% inflation, that $20.9 million real value represents a multiple of roughly 63 times the actual capital contributed.
63x.
Yeah. The family slowly put in $326,000, and they're walking away with 63 times that amount in real inflation-adjusted purchasing power.
So I have a question for you listening right now. Does knowing that inflation eats 85% of the headline number change how you feel about the strategy? Or is a 63x real return enough of a win for you?
It's a huge win.
It is. $21 million of modern purchasing power is incredible. But wait, we are not done with the caveats.
Really not.
Even after adjusting for inflation, the family has this massive nest egg. But there is a massive trap waiting at the end. We are transitioning from the uncontrollable force of inflation to the highly controllable yet devastating force of taxation.
And this is the part of the story that basic compound interest calculators entirely skip over. Right.
The critical detail here is that under the proposed IRC Section 530A regulations, this Trump account is structured as a traditional IRA. It is not a Roth.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. That means the money has been growing tax-deferred, not tax-free. When the 65-year-old finally prepares to retire and starts withdrawing that money, the IRS is waiting to collect its share.
And we need to break down exactly how that works, because they put in $162,500 of their own personal after-tax money, so they can just pull that out tax-free, right? Like a return of basis.
Well, the report explains the mechanics of the pro rata rule under IRC Section 72, which prevents you from doing exactly what you just suggested.
Oh, of course it does.
You cannot just cherry-pick the tax-free money. The IRS views your IRA like a blended smoothie. If you put in a handful of strawberries, which is your after-tax basis, and a truckload of spinach, which is the taxable employer contributions, the federal seed, and all the investment growth, you can't just drink the strawberry part.
That's a great analogy. Because the growth makes up over 99% of the account's value, the pro rata rule dictates that over 99% of every single dollar you withdraw is fully taxable as ordinary income.
Wait, let me make sure I heard that right. Ordinary income, not long-term capital gains, which have, favorable rates. It is taxed as if you earned it on a W-2 paycheck.
Correct. And here is where the crisis truly hits. Under the Secure Act 2.0 rules, at age 73, the account holder is subject to required minimum distributions, or RMDs.
RMDs.
The government forces you to liquidate and withdraw a certain percentage of the account every year, whether you actually need the money or not. On a balance of $142.8 million, the first year's RMD is roughly $5.39 million.
In a single year?
In a single year. That forced distribution instantly triggers the absolute top 37% federal tax bracket, plus whatever state income taxes apply.
It feels like this account is a financial Trojan horse. You spend 65 years patiently letting it grow, doing everything right, and suddenly out pops the IRS demanding millions. But the ELG report does offer a tactical solution for this, right?
There is a solution, but it requires highly strategic planning decades in advance.
Okay, how does it work?
The report highlights that the growth period restrictions on the account end at age 18. At that point, the account holds approximately $334,000. The tactical move is to execute strategic Roth conversions during the account holder's absolute lowest income years, typically between ages 18 and 25.
Okay, let's drill down into that. Why that specific window? Why not do it when they're 15 or 30?
It has everything to do with tax brackets and the kiddie tax. So before a dependent reaches a certain age, a large portion of their unearned investment income is taxed at their parents' much higher marginal rate. But once they phase out of the kiddie tax, usually around age 24, and assuming they're in college or just starting their career making very little earned income, their personal tax bracket is incredibly low.
Because they're young and broke.
Precisely. They can convert $30,000 to $40,000 a year from the traditional side to the Roth side at very low, sometimes 0% effective tax rates. If they aggressively convert the balance during those low-income years, all future growth from that point forward happens inside a Roth structure.
And Roth money grows completely tax-free.
Forever. Yeah. Forever. And crucially, Roth IRAs do not have required minimum distributions at age 73.
But I have to ask, if a family forgets to do these Roth conversions between 18 and 25, is there any other way to avoid that massive tax bomb at 73? Like, what if the kid just lets it ride?
According to the ELG analysis, no, there isn't. Once the account holder enters their prime earning years in their late 20s and 30s, doing Roth conversions becomes prohibitively expensive.
Because it stacks on top of their salary.
Exactly, pushing them into high tax brackets immediately. The report states, this is the most consequential tax decision of the beneficiary's life. Missing this specific window is fatal to the tax efficiency of the strategy.
Wow. Okay, so we've looked at the exponential mechanics of the hockey stick growth, we've adjusted for inflation, and we've navigated the Roth conversion strategy. This brings us to the final major takeaway, which synthesizes all of this into actionable reality.
And it all comes down to the staggering mathematical cost of delay.
Yes.
Time is the only variable that truly governs this equation. The report quantifies the penalty for waiting. If parents delay opening this account until the child is 10 years old, instead of at birth, they're looking at 55 years of compounding instead of 65.
A 10-year difference.
Right. At the 13.5% return rate, that 10-year delay drops the terminal value from $142.8 million down to $36.5 million.
Think about that. If you wait until your kid is in the 5th grade to start this, you haven't just missed a few payments. You've literally set a match to $106 million of future value.
This raises an important question about the psychology of inaction, honestly. We can isolate the power of time just by looking at the initial federal seed money.
The $1,000 pilot seed.
Yeah. Even if the parents and the employer add nothing, zero annual contributions, that one-time $1,000 seed deposited at birth compounds to $3.6 million all on its own over 65 years.
Just the $1,000 alone turns into nearly $4 million.
Just 1,000. The ELG points out that capturing this seed is as simple as filing IRS Form 4547 and checking line 7 when the child is born.
That's it.
That's it. The barrier to entry is almost non-existent. Yet human nature often causes delays. People think, oh, I'll get to the paperwork next month. But the engine of this wealth is the uninterrupted compounding clock.
So what does this all mean? Let's recap this for you. $14 a day and a $1,000 seed can create dynastic wealth, thanks to the hockey stick of 65 years of compounding. But you have to mentally adjust for 3% inflation, and you absolutely must execute Roth conversions at age 18 to disarm the tax time bomb. And you cannot delay.
It's a fascinating look at the raw mechanics of long-term wealth, but I want to leave you with one final macro-level implication to consider.
Oh, lay it on us.
If millions of these accounts are opened and an entire generation reaches age 73, simultaneously facing required minimum distributions of $5 million a year, what happens to the broader U.S. economy when that absolute tsunami of cash is forced out of the stock market and into the real world all at once?
Oh my gosh.
Does it create a massive economic boom, or does it trigger an entirely new wave of inflation?
Now that is a thought that will keep you up at night, the ultimate unintended consequence. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep exploring the fine print in your own financial lives, and we will see you next time.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.